All right, the first myth, and I hope that maybe this one might have been largely dispelled by now, but just to be clear, is that there may be a misperception that some people have that they'll say, well, this NBAF laboratory is being built to study animal diseases, and folks might think that, well, okay, I'm not an animal, so I don't really have to worry about this. That's not true. The major diseases that historically have been weaponized by governments have been quote-unquote animal diseases, these zoonotic diseases that this lab in large measure is being constructed to study. And so, you know, things like anthrax and equine encephalitis, Q fever, these diseases that you may have heard of or may not have heard of, but they are in fact diseases of livestock and other animals. But they also infect humans. And when we were in the business of developing these as weapons, and when other countries were in the business of developing these as weapons, these were the diseases that were found to work the best. So it would be definitely a misperception for people to think that because the lab, you know, is working on animal diseases, that this doesn't mean that there isn't a human health issue raised by potential accidents. The second is there's sort of a linked series of ideas here that I'm gonna try to work towards. And to be a bit frank about it, I've been alarmed at some of the statements that I've read by University of Georgia officials with respect to some of these issues. So I have taken some quotes from the Banner Herald and I believe one from Flagpole here, and I want to talk about them a little bit. It's a myth, and I would be tempted to almost say a lie when it is said that NBAF will only have small quantities of biological weapons agents. This is not true. The quote that I have here is by David Lee, the Vice President for Research at Georgia, who says the amount of pathogens being worked on would be minuscule and unable to survive even if they did escape the facility. I'm going to deal with the first part of that statement right now. And a cow or a pig that's dying of a BSL-3 or level 4 agent is not a small quantity of agent. It is an enormous quantity of agent. This lab will have and will be routinely handling very large amounts of anthrax or other types of agents because they have to infect animals experimentally, and when those infections progress, the animal is basically a walking stockpile of that particular agent. You know, I promise no imagery, but if you think about, for example, Nipah virus is one of the BSL-4 agents that certainly would be studied at NBAF. It's a pig disease that also infects humans that first appeared in Malaysia in the 90s. A pig that has been infected with Nipah has, is foaming at the mouth and has uncontrollable spasms. And from a biological safety and sort of sanitary standpoint, you have to treat that animal basically as a cloud of agent because its movements and all are kicking up, all sorts of potentially infectious material. So to be honest with you, when I see it stated that this lab won't be working or be working with minuscule quantities of agent, I have to say that very frankly is not true. And I do not understand how someone who knew about what these labs do could say such a thing. Moving on in the same type of thing. Another myth is that sometimes is said, or is that the infections can't spread. And the quote that I have here is that the teaspoon-size amounts of pathogens that would be stored at the facility are not contagious between humans, and even though under rare circumstances they can spread from an animal to a human. This is another quote from Dr. Lee just recently in the Banner Herald. That too could really lead someone to misunderstand the nature of the agents and the work that's done in this facility. Some of the agents that will be handled in the facility are in fact transmissible from human to human. And that the example that immediately comes to mind would be types of influenza. The circumstances under which some of these diseases are passed from animals to humans may not be rare at all. And you just need to think back a few years ago, we did not have a West Nile virus problem in the United States, and now it's across most of the United States. West Nile virus, until very recently, would have been very much classified as one of these exotic zoonotic agents. Now it's endemic in most of the United States. So the notion that it would only be under very rare circumstances that you could have transmission in the case of many of the agents that would be under study that is not true either. And finally, small amounts. Well, I mean, of course, there's no reason to store a large amount of an agent because you just have to take a few days to grow it if you wanted a large amount of agent. So from a practical standpoint, of course, you know, if I have a sample of a particular strain, why would I freeze, you know, a liter of it when, you know, I could just have a few milliliters and then I could grow it out when I needed to. So, yeah, it's true. In the freezers, they're not gonna store more than they need. But the thing is that some of these agents, when they are prepared for some of the kinds of research that will happen at NBAF, using sporulated anthrax, for example, things that are we'll get into this in a minute, that are in many estimations weaponized agent, can be very lethal. And the lesson that's been taught about that is that in '79 in Russia, now the Russians had an offensive biological weapons program. They were mass producing weaponized anthrax. That's not something that, fingers crossed, should ever happen at NBAF. However, they had a problem. They had a leak, and that leak killed about 100 people and thousands of animals. The leak was estimated to be about 1 or 2 grams, and that's what caused it. So you know, when you bring up the Sverdlovsk incident, the proponents of laboratories will say, well, that's very different because they were involved in an offensive biological weapons program. Well, that's true. They were involved in an offensive biological weapons program, but the amount that leaked through an apparently faulty filter was not 500 kilograms or something like that. It was a gram or 2, and that was the toll that it caused. So again, I find the assurances that have been made to be, less than forthcoming about what the reality is with these kinds of agents.